Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Empire of the Ants. So for those not across it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I take a look at the first 2 hours of a game. That's the Steam refund window. Steam says you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time period. And broadly speaking, I would agree as a rule and say that 20 hours in, you're probably not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short, punchy video, give you the broad strokes info, keep it around 10 minutes and you can make up your mind on your own. Okay, straight out of the gate. This game is so cool. I didn't know what I was getting into, and I am quite invested, actually. And here's the thing. We had Empires of the Undergrowth come out earlier this year, went into full release, and that was well received. And that was an ant colony simulator type game, almost identical names. And honestly, this is coming out of publisher Microids, which, in my experience, have had a pretty terrible track record. They handled Flashback 2, which was so on fire, it never ended up on the channel. The 13 remake, so it seems like they've managed to get their hands on some interesting properties and kind of bungle them. So that's what I knew going in. I was like, is this just a clone of another Ant game by a publisher with a bad track record? And look, I'm not trying to bash on them, I'm just trying to highlight that they've done an absolute 180. This is really cool. This is a good reason why I do my channel, is to find these gems. I mean, this isn't strictly indie in this case, it's a AA price tag, and I would argue it has that high production quality. But so far, yeah, absolutely worth it as far as impressions go. And also, it's very unique. If you are the same mind as me, that you think it's like Empires of the Undergrowth, unique under its own sort of way, that is way more of an RTS, whereas this is much more of like an semi-open world third-person action narrative game where your character is not necessarily like a combative ant. You're one of them brain bugs, you're slightly above it, you're kind of on the Queen's payroll, and you kind of RTS strategy but from the third-person commander seat. I can't think of a great comparison, but you see these sort of games come along, these weird hybrids. Chuck in with the way that the game plays out is that you do have missions, but it's also interspersed with these kind of open world, platforming things, and the controls work really well doing what they're doing. So broadly speaking, it's doing a lot of cool stuff. It's very fresh. It's very beautiful, and it's kind of ticking every single box. I really recommend it. So let's go a little bit deeper. So the setup is you're this ant, you've got a number, 1003 something, whatever. The way they talk to each other is really quite fascinating. You know, they're all calling each other sisters and it's all very pragmatic, but there is a kind of investment to it. Actually, it's worth mentioning, like the opening cinematic of this game is very, Scorsese cinema. And I thought there was going to be no voice or anything. Well, there isn't any voice, but the way that it opened, it was very show don't tell. Again, to use the Empires of the Undergrowth touchstone, because how many other bug ant simulator games do you have where, how do they handle any sort of narrative progression? In that, you have a narrator voiceovering everything, basically. This is not so. You are the ants. This is Ant Simulator. And yeah, some really cool cinematic camera shots and action music, and they are really leaning into that aspect of it. I've come up against, you're a small bug in the scheme of things. When bumblebees or dragonflies go past, they sound like a friggin' V8 screaming, or like a Harley Davidson just flying down to your suburban street outside your window going as hard hell for leather. It's pretty wild, if exaggerated. Just these screaming bumblebee engines coming over your head. I'm using my hands and looking up at the ceiling of my apartment. That's really cool. And then just wait till you see bloody spiders. I tell you what, I'm not arachnophobic, not even remotely. I come from Australia, right? Spiders are normal. But I tell you what, if you're funny about spiders, this might not be the game for you, mate. Because they are big. And the devs know exactly what they're doing. I was just doing a segment before I hung up my 2 hours. I was sort of exploring an underground area, and the spiders aren't necessarily going after you, though if you go out of your way to go after them, they will just kill you, which happens. I did it, I was curious. But talking about the V8 engine stuff and all that, these things have monstrous horror movie growls, lions dressed up as spiders, and compared to you, they're as big as a friggin' skyscraper. And so I was in this underground area, you know, and this shadow was cast over it from above, and you look up and there is the biggest spider you've ever seen in your life. Well, because you're an ant, you know, twitching around, casting its shadow down on you. It's very, very clever, if, you know, terrifying. So it has a much more sort of cinematic quality to it than I would ever have imagined. And then that's not even necessarily getting into the gameplay. So it's sort of split. You've come out of hibernation, you're one of the Queen's lieutenants, and you know, you start off pretty basic tutorial stuff, platforming around. You kind of grip to everything. You do have a sprint button, which you got to use sparingly, because sprint will kind of ice skate you off of things in a way. Like, you want to go fast, sure, but make sure it's flat overland. If you're climbing up something, sprint's the fastest way to fly off the edge. And you jump from puzzle to puzzle, and there's a lot of water related puzzles. And, you know, like, for an example, one of the sort of earlier plot points is like, we've just come out of hibernation. The Queen has seconded me to go to another bloody hive, anthill. I don't really get in on the ant discourse very often. Nest is probably the best one. But they've inexplicably had a flood, and they're not sure what's going on because they've been there for seasons, and it's suddenly there. And it is very Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It's not quite grounded. You know, you don't seem to be in someone's backyard, but you can see human influence, like, in the background. So it's implied that something's happened that's outside of the predictable. And so you have to platform over to the other hive, the other nest, and, you know, help them out. A big part of it is, you know, those overworld platforming one ant against the wilderness missions that push the narrative forward. And then you sort of do busy work, instanced missions. And again, they can vary. Like I said, there's one where I'm going underground, jumping on fireflies to eat. But there's more commonly, you have this kind of rudimentary RTS kind of gameplay loop where you have these miniature nests and you interact with them, and it creates like a cool little UI radial around the nest. It's very, very clever. I like integrated UI when it's done in a clever way. And essentially you can upgrade your nests, you can put little barriers and defenses, or give them defensive troops with, you know, like acid spit, that sort of thing. And then you can also buy upgrades that you can activate. So you'll have little units associated with your nests, and you'll basically drive them around. There's a bit of a rock, paper, scissors between, you know, warrior, ranged, and worker. So you've got to total war these guys into combat with each other. And that's obviously not quite at that scale, or is it? One of the missions I did was like a bloody Normandy beach landing. But the reason for the total war comparison is it will give you sort of a stat, a green arrow up, red arrow down, depending on the engagement. Once they're stuck in melee, they're stuck, and you can't get them out unless you put another unit in to try and draw them out. So it actually kind of, in the moment to moment, shares a lot with Total War battling systems, albeit, you know, a bit smaller scale. So yeah, you'll end up essentially trying to pair off your regiments, and you're sitting in the back line, kind of telling them who to attack and where to move, and then firing off these area effects, which can be things like healing, reinforcements, that sort of thing, enrage, armor. I've got like a fear pheromone now, you can scare off enemy units. But yeah, one of the big centerpieces that I sort of did just recently was introductory to the kind of scale. And I had bugs under my command, but my little base was kind of separate. Anyway, the point is, it was a contrivance for me to engage with a battle between enemies and allies and help as you can, as opposed to engaging with the full-on base building. And so it was just this pitched war between like bloody 4 factions on either side. I got these sort of dung beetle dudes on my team. I don't mind, that's fine. And again, kind of like Total War, especially like the Warhammer one, you know, where you can send bloody dragons and stuff barreling through poor little pikemen and that. Yeah, my dung beetle's gone ballistic. Also, the ragdoll physics in this game are turned up to 11, and I love it. So dudes will grab each other and belt them into the ground in these little canned animations, and fling them bloody miles into the sky, especially these dung beetles going ballistic. And so I'm sort of in amongst it, shoulder to shoulder with the boys, planning them out, giving them their pheromone boosts, and then you'll just see like, woo, a body just go flying past you over your shoulder. And all of this is interlaced with, really awesome battle music, and it's all just got a very cinematic quality. 1 million units on screen. It looks like $1 million. So yeah, broadly speaking, I am beyond impressed. I have had my socks blown off, and if Microids keeps this up, this is a very good redemption arc. Anyway, there's no need to talk beyond that. I think this is really cool. And while it's very different, it sort of does give me vibes of things like, Ancestors, the monkey evolution game. Basically, this is a really interesting, kind of risky project, right? Fairly high budget in the scheme of things. Like this kind of, as a consumer, you can probably see it too, even if this isn't for you or whatever. This represents a risk the industry won't take anymore. And I kind of respect it. And I really think they stuck the landing. So this is something worth getting behind. If you've got the splash around money and this interests you, give it a go. I'm really impressed with it, and I'm kind of invested. They've implied that maybe something unexplained, read human influence, has caused this flood, and my Aunt Queen seems pretty keen to explore and expand beyond the known edge of So like they're setting up some sort of narrative, and I'm kind of in, boys. But you can hear the grin on my face. What an absolute surprise and a pleasant game to bring to you. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.